Good evening, everyone, and for some of you, good late night. Hi, my name is Eric Hayes, and I am the artistic director of the Eugene O'Neill Foundation. And I'm very happy to be joined this evening by Beth Wynstra, who is, among many things, she's the dramaturg for our upcoming production of Beyond the Horizon. And Beth and I have had a really good dialogue going over the last few months, and just seemed like it would be something nice to share some of the content and some of the thinking going into this upcoming production of Beyond the Horizon. I would just share with you, just to start, that this production of Beyond the Horizon kind of grew out of the idea that one, the play is a public domain play, and I was aware that with the COVID situation, we may be looking at a recording, and so I wanted to play that could be recorded, and also it really embraces the farm-like qualities and the beauty of the Las Trampas wilderness. Beyond the Horizon has 6 scenes in it, and half the scenes are set outdoors, and so it just really seems to lend itself to a barn and a bunch of beautiful surrounding area to be the setting for this play. And we hadn't done it for a while, so it seemed like a good time for that. But I'd first like to just kind of start us off. Beth and I have outlined a few things we'd like to talk about, and then eventually we can go into some questions or comments people would like to share through the chat. But I'd like to just start off by Beth, if you could introduce yourself, and would you please share with us your understanding of being a dramaturg and some of the work you've been doing for this production.
Yes, thank you, Eric. And I, want to say thank you so much to the Eugene O'Neill Foundation. It is a delight and a thrill to be working on this production. A special thanks to Ali Bodden and Teresa Morley, who are working really hard behind the scenes on all things tech. And thank you to you, Eric. This has been such a wonderful journey, and it continues. Our work continues. So yes, a dramaturg. I was thinking about that term, and one of my favorite books about dramaturgy is a book called Ghost Light by a man by the name of Michael Mark Chambers, and his introductory chapter to that book is titled "What the Beep is a Dramaturg?" And it's a question I think that, even the most astute theater patrons and theater goers, might not know what that position is. So a dramaturg is, in my mind, the official researcher of the production. So as one who tries to make the experience for those performing in the play, as well as those who will come and see the play, really compelling and exciting, dramaturgs can serve, a number of purposes in that research mode. So they can do, historical research if there's questions about a particular context or time period that a play is set in. If there is a nebulous or confusing phrase in a play, a dramaturg might research that phrase and help the actors and the director out with what it means. And then for the audience side of things, a dramaturg would often do something like we're doing tonight, doing a talk back or a pre-talk before the show. Eric and I are working on an audience engagement guide for Beyond the Horizon. So that's, in line with the work of dramaturgs. But it's really fun, exciting, unexpected work that this position does. And I'll share one story. I was serving as a dramaturg many years ago for a production of The Glass Menagerie in California. And it was a wonderful director, but who was really, committed to historical accuracy. And he called me one night at midnight. That was, his working hours. And he said, "Beth, is it likely that the gum that the gentleman caller chews in the last act of the play, could it be cinnamon? Would that be historically accurate for the 1930s? Because the actor couldn't chew mint gum. There was something going on with mint and an allergic reaction. So I had to research, would cinnamon gum be historically accurate for that play? And we found that juicy fruit was the flavor that we ended up using. But those are the kind of wonderful, paths that a dramaturg can take. And for this production, Eric, you and I, like you have said, we've been engaged in many, conversations over the last few months about the characters in this play and what these characters want and what are certain elements you as a director want to highlight about the relationships between the characters. We've talked about the site specificity of Beyond the Horizon at Dow House, and I loved thinking through that Contra Costa County is a place where, yes, there is farmland and a sea nearby, that water and farm, nearby. So it works in that location. And then lastly, I'll just say I've had wonderful interactions with your actors, mainly over email. We've had to figure out some nautical phrases that, Captain, Scott utters, as well as maybe what Ruth's hair would look like at various points in the play. So it's been a joy. It's been a joy.
Yeah, actually, I can piggyback off of that conversation about nautical terms. I believe in one of your dialogues, the term spanking boom came into it, and that's just now vernacular for all kinds of things, apparently, in rehearsal.
I'm glad. Yeah, we had ship diagrams going and different places on the. I mean, it was so much. It's great. It's really fun, and this kind of research helps the actor, give as realistic performance as possible, because they want to know exactly what they are saying, what these phrases mean. So it's all part of the work.
Could you actually, Beth, could you share, I know in the last week we had some questions about terminology in talking about South America and Argentina, and because there's references, the actors, to their credit, they come up with logical reasons why they're going to say it one way or the other. But we still wanted to lean on you to kind of help us through that. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yes. So, and Eric, I'm gonna have to go back to the research, but I'll see if I can get this right. So the question was why the Argentine or the Argentine versus Argentina, and why the is put in front of it. And so, we in doing some research found that really up until the beginning of the 20th century, it did have that the in front of it. So the Argentine, as a kind of nod to, I think that, the Spanish, which would have, a la or L in front of several of their words. So we did some research about what that meant, and also some of the geography in that Andrew talks about. We figured out some pronunciation on some of those spots in Argentina as well. So that was all new to me. That was an educational experience in itself. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, I would also share, I appreciate that out of our dialogue, you mentioned it already a little bit, but knowing that we were going to embrace Dow House and Los Trompos and this area as the background for the play, but knowing that most O'Neill plays are almost always exclusively somewhere on the East Coast, it was really kind of a happy thing to kind of discover or think about. Okay, yes, well, let's put a farm out on the Delta, which you can actually see if you look, if you're looking to the north from O'Neill's garage, you can see a bit of the waterway that leads up to Sacramento, and it's very easy to imagine that there's a farm out there right next to that waterway that can take you to Sacramento or take you out to the ocean.
Absolutely. No, that was one of my most favorite conversations, Eric. I loved figuring that out and thinking about those vistas and what Robert would be seeing and wanting to get to, and it works so well at Dow House. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Well, one other thing I wanted to, we wanted to talk about was about tragedy, and the notion of American tragedy, and some people have referred to Beyond the Horizon as sort of the first great American tragic drama. I feel comfortable in that idea that that may be true, but it's interesting to think what, besides it coming from Eugene O'Neill, who is an American, et cetera, what about the play is American, and tragic, and what is there something uniquely American about it? Beth, can you share with us some of your thoughts about tragedy and where this fits in with tragedy?
Yes, I mean, certainly Beyond the Horizon has, some of those good old fashioned, going back to the Greek, tragic elements, characters making a decision that impacts them for the rest of their lives, notions of predestined paths, looking to God or a godlike figure when there's sufferings happening. So those elements are there. But I do, you're referencing what a lot of reviewers at the time of the 1920 production were highlighting, that this is the first American tragedy. And I think there are several elements. I will not get through all of them, but just a few that I would like to highlight that I think do speak to that American tragedy phrase. And so the first that I think about, which goes with where we just ended about the landscape, but this play, there's this reverence for the family farm and for farmland. And what's interesting to note is that the premiere of Beyond the Horizon in 1920 coincided with a census report of that same year, where for the first time since the census was taken in 1790, there were more persons living in urban areas than in rural areas. So 1920 is the first time that there is this shift is marked in the census. And between 1910 and 1920, the number of workers on farms declined nearly 150,000, which pushed up, non-farm workers to more than 5.2 million. So this is really, I think, an interesting backdrop to this play and to notions of America as an agrarian nation. I mean, things are really starting to shift here as Beyond the Horizon is premiering. So I have to just quote this. This was a review in Life magazine for the premiere of the production, and the reviewer cheekily said that he does not believe that O'Neill's work is not calculated to encourage the back to the farm movement. So I would agree with that. I don't think anyone going to see the play is then saying we need to go back to the farm, but the play really, there's a focus in the play on how the farm and farmland figures in the characters' imaginations, particularly as they leave and particularly as they're trapped there. So, notions of land and farm and what it means of getting away from that, these are being echoed, off the stage as well. Similarly, I think that American ideal of the frontier and wide open spaces is being challenged certainly a bit as we have this move to urban centers. So so that's one aspect that I would just highlight that feels very American to me. The second is, given that population shift that I just talked about, there's, I think that in this play there is a struggle between old traditions, old world versus new adventures, new paths. And we see that, maybe with the family and Andrew versus what Robert wants to do. But even, the title of the play, Beyond the Horizon, is, often seen as about Robert and his desires. But if we think about Andrew, when he is abroad, he's the, without giving too much away for the play, but the brother who leaves, he has a pull back to home and wants to come, has ideas about what home is. And those are really disrupted when he gets home and sees what has happened to the farm. So this struggle between, old world, new world, the scholar Jeffrey Eric Jenkins really points in this play that the new world longing is always countered by the old world longing. So there's just kind of this struggle there. And to me, when I think about old world versus new world, I think about certainly the immigrant experience. Millions of immigrants coming and having that push and pull between leaving old traditions behind, fostering new ones, and so what all that means. And old versus new, of course, is a common theme in American literature, particularly at the start of the 20th century. Which will lead me to my last little point here about, American tragedy. I'll borrow a phrase from, a renowned O'Neill scholar, Travis Bogard, but he talks about this thing called the horizon syndrome. And he uses that term not only to describe beyond the horizon, but also a number of, novels and poems and short stories at the first part of the 20th century, in which you have characters who have longing, who are wanting to go to new places and expand their own horizons and experience new kinds of freedom. I think about Dreiser's Sister Carrie. I think about Nella Larsen's Passing. These are stories and any number of modernist poetry that has those themes. But Eric, you and I have talked about the notions of the American dream, that we're encouraged to have those dreams and we're encouraged to go after those goals and to go see new places or have that new marriage or whatever it is, with the idea that everything is going to work out. And if you're self-reliant and you work hard and you do all these things, and of course that doesn't happen in this play. I'll leave it at that without giving too much away. But so I think those are some things that come to mind for me about that, American nature of this play.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you mentioned the immigrant experience, and the actor Tim Holt Jones, who is playing James Mayo, the father, the father who at the start of the play, it's his farm. He detected in his lines, he just detected something Irish about it. So he just had this desire to throw a little lilt into things, because it just felt. And so, it definitely plays into the idea that James may have come from somewhere else, or his family came from somewhere else, for sure.
Yes. And that was another little, that was another little journey about the Irish in the San Francisco Bay Area, because we had to kind of make that trace for your production, right, of how that might have worked in this world. So absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, I feel like maybe it would be helpful. I know most people who are with us today probably know Beyond the Horizon, but for some that don't, just the basic idea of the play is that there's the Mayo family farm, and James Mayo and his wife Kate are the patriarch and matriarch of the farm, and they have two sons, Robert Mayo and Andrew Mayo. They're basically, the two brothers are very close, very sort of inseparable, but very differently cut from different cloths. One seems very at home Andrew seems very at home at the farm and is destined to be a farmer, and Robert just doesn't seem to. He's like a fish out of water. He's like the one person, he's the fish out in the middle of the field. Everyone else in the place seems like a farmer, and he doesn't fit in. And so part of his challenge is to find he's the one who's always dreaming about the horizon, because clearly where he is doesn't seem right, and he's always longing for something else. And then I would just also add that the neighboring farm is the Atkins farm, and that is where Ruth Atkins comes from. And Ruth Atkins is the young woman who, I think, at least at the start of the play, you would say everyone assumes that Ruth and brother Andrew will be together. They just seem like a good fit together. And that kind of gets thrown for a monkey wrench when things happen unexpectedly with Robert. But yeah, it's definitely, it's interesting, talking about, what makes it American for me. I can't help but think that in America, I mean, the idea of a horizon probably registers with people everywhere, but with America, we're supposed to be kind of endless horizon. We're supposed to be endlessly free and choices. And one thing in this play that I think jumps out at me and I think I hope this will lead you into something, Beth, here, but is that these boys, these young men, they're in their 20s, Andrew and Robert, in many ways are free. I mean, they're kind of been nurtured on this idea of they're free. They're in this land of freedom, and they can make choices and do anything they want. And yet I'm also struck in the same play, their peer Ruth is in this land also, but she is not free to make any choice that she wants. And I think that that's interesting for those characters, but I think also touches on larger themes of expectations for men and women. You know, this play was 100 years ago, so it was definitely around then, and obviously it's around in its own forms today. But Beth, you've done a lot of work with analyzing marital dynamics in not only O'Neill's plays, but I think generally in literature. Could you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that subject with this play or in general?
Yeah, no, Eric, you absolutely. And I think that idea about expectations, and when you were saying about, yes, the children have been raised to this belief of being free, especially the boys, and you're right, there is something different for Ruth. But even still, I would encourage everyone here who's going to watch Eric's brilliant production. I'm struck by, I think it's the start of the scene 2 of Act 1, where all the adults are talking and they are charting out almost the kids' future, right? That, oh, he doesn't love, or he does love her, and oh, he'll do this, and so that, I guess, yes, freedom, but not really. There are pretty set paths in some ways for these characters. So I think we'll circle back to that idea, but yeah, absolutely. So my current book project is a project that examines how the marriages and wife characters in O'Neill's plays connect to and respond to prominent marital guidance that was abundant during the time of, during the 1920s and 30s. There was just this abundance of marital guidance and advice literature, magazine articles, newspaper columns, scientific studies about marriage and how marriage operates, and kind of everyone was writing on this subject. And what I have found in my research is that the wife characters in O'Neill's plays, who at times I think have been somewhat labeled as shrewish or nagging or destroyers of men's dreams, in a lot of ways they are really doing kind of what would have been advised to them to do to be good wives. And they're following paths that would have been kind of set by culturally constructed notions of what makes for marriage and a wife in marriage. And the other part of my discovery and my research is that so many of the women who actually played O'Neill's wife characters were experiencing off the stage very similar dynamics in their own lives and marriages. So you have a number of actors who have newspaper articles written about them and their marriages, but then they themselves are authoring and writing articles and treatises and advice columns themselves. So it's this really interesting moment, and I would love to share two, beyond the horizon connections that come up in my book that I think I hope are relevant to this discussion of marriage and expectations around marriage. So Louise Closer Hale, who is the actor who originated the character of Mrs. Atkins in the original production. Just a few years after she starred in Beyond the Horizon, and she got rave reviews as Ruth's mother in the production, she penned an article called "Why I Didn't Divorce My Husband," and that was in 1924 in Cosmopolitan magazine. And in that article, she argues in very frank, Mrs. Atkins-like tones against any kind of facade in marriage. So this is what Closer Hale, the actor, argues. I'd heard a good bit about keeping up the illusion. I don't know why we should keep it up or for whom. Of all the false advice given to a bride, I think this illusion business is the worst. Brides go down the aisle with their face veiled and go back with it uncovered. They can look at the world. They want to. That's why they married. They have passed beyond the illusion. So that's her quote. And I think the very fact that she's writing about this, ever given advice for brides about keeping up illusions, keeping that romantic aura around marriages, and how that job often fell to wives, really has an important connection to, what happens in Beyond the Horizon, where the moment that Ruth and Robert, without giving too much away, but when they declare their love and decide to get married, it's a moment full of illusions and full of romance and masking and performance and, not whole lot of honesty at all. So, and then I would encourage, audiences who are going to watch your production, pay attention in the play how Ruth has to keep up illusions in her marriage, particularly for her mother and mother-in-law at the start of Act 2. And then even when Andrew comes back home the first time, how she dresses and how she carries herself. And so there is a lot of illusion making that is left to Ruth. So that's one little piece. And then the other piece I'll share is that a few years also after 1926, after Beyond the Horizon had been premiered, but was still running in theaters in a theater in New York, there was a big article in the New York Times with the title "Trial Marriage a Success." And this article was featured Elsie Reiser, who was the third woman to play Ruth on Broadway in Beyond Horizon. And the article is about how she and her husband engaged in this trial marriage, that at their wedding, no one, not even the Reverend, knew that they were thinking of this only as a trial. And they would really think about the marriage being official after a year had passed. I mean, that's pretty revolutionary for 1926, but here was this couple cognizant of the fact that, marriage is hard and that they wanted a year to really sort out, is this right? Can we get to know each other? And I think that speaks to, the custom of really not knowing before getting to the altar. So, that was Elsie Reiser. And I think her experiment would have been very helpful for a character like Ruth that she played just a few years earlier. So these notions of performing and illusions, these are all really important in the play and in the marriages. And, Eric, you already mentioned about, paths kind of already being paved, so to speak, that Ruth and Andrew were going to be together. And that was kind of destined without any kind of conversation with those two about if they really did love each other or what this marriage would be. And also in this play, we get, these young people marrying, but with not a lot of modeling from the adult generation, what a good, loving, devoted marriage looks like, so it was like, oh, kids, here you go. And there's no kind of model of what that was or what life would be like after they say I do. And Beyond the Horizon is similar to so many O'Neill plays where you kind of get that engagement moment, and then there's a time travel, 3-5 years into the future where a very different couple is found. And we see that in Beyond the Horizon. So, to wrap up, I think that this is an interesting play for marriage because you have that older generation who has, marriage for them is expectations, love not really a prerequisite, right? They're going to follow in the farmer's wife kind of mode. Then you have the younger generation where love does come in, but almost to a great extent that overshadows honesty and authenticity. So that's also somewhat disastrous. So we have, some interesting things happening that, really though resonate in advice literature, which was really telling brides, you worry about that honesty stuff later, worry about getting to know later. Just look pretty, make sure your hair is glossy, make sure you don't say too much, don't reveal too much about yourself. I mean, this is really promoted very, very heavily during the time. And I think we see whispers of it in the play.
Yeah, it sounds very much like people's social media presence also, where they curate the way they present themselves to the world to make an introduction of a certain type, you know,
Yes.
hiding or pushing the other stuff out of the way,
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, I'm really struck by a couple of things that you were talking about. One, I just would share with this production and all along as I've been talking to Beth, we talked about how I Robert Mayo and his Beyond the Horizon speech is kind of the best known thing to come out of this play, partially because of the original Broadway production in which the lead actor really kind of put an emphasis
Yes.
on himself and the things he said, and actually, edited out a lot of other things that gave short shrift to some of the other characters, chiefly Ruth.
Yes.
But in this production, we really want to emphasize that this is about a generation, basically, of young people at a crossroads. We have the two brothers, Robert and Andrew, and we have Ruth, and they are all at this juncture where they make life decisions, and how it turns out. And I wanted to see Ruth as an equal part in that. It's not just about Robert and his dreams, and it's not just about two brothers. It's actually about a generation, and so I think it's really important. And there are places in the production where I see us interpreting her as an equal part, and she's they're they each of these three young people have their challenges, whether it's Robert, who just seems out of place and can't seem to find his place, Andrew, who keeps making choices because he's an entitled young man who can make these choices, making bad choices, and Ruth, who's continually stuck with very limited choices. And I will just share one thing, that a moment that I'm looking to create, which has not been done yet, but I'm looking to create at the end of the play. I'm looking to create one more avenue or juncture where Ruth is maybe at a crossroads, and we don't know what she does because it's not in the play. But I'm trying to highlight that she recognizes, oh, this is another moment where I'm at a juncture, and what am I going to do?
Yes.
And that seems really important.
Yeah.
And one other thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say one other thing, Beth, was I like to play up what you also said about expectations. I feel like these parents in this play, and like I said, we've got the parents of the brothers, but we also have the mother of Ruth. These parents, at best, are the type that have good intentions for their kids. Yeah. But like, for instance, James Mayo, I imagine him as the kind of father who just assumes you'll do the right thing because you watched him. He never had to tell you what to do. You just watched him, right? And now you're going to do the right thing according to what he wants, of course.
That's right.
And it doesn't always work out that way.
I love that, Eric. Yeah, I think that is, and I'm so excited about your ideas around that character and the father-son dynamic also, which is fascinating. But I think you're right, Eric, and this is maybe, we've talked a lot about, why this play at this time for this audience, this play is just over 100 years old, and what about it still works. And we start there with the idea of parents and children, and this is a play where I do think kids are left, those three are left to their own devices, as opposed to being on their devices, which is the 2021 version. But they're left to their own devices, where it's there's kind of like, here's what you'll do, and you've watched me, so go. And there's not a whole lot of wondering why they're doing it, just that they need to do these certain things, and that the why of why they got married or why they did these paths comes way too late in their lives and in this play. And it's really tragic. So I think that the dynamic of parents and what they want for their children, and wanting, but then actually investing the time and seeing it through for children is a very different thing. So I think you're right, Eric. And I've really enjoyed our conversations too about, farming and tradition, and the same things happen year after year. So of course these children should know what happens if they've been living here, but we find that they don't, certainly, because they're young people, right? And they're impulsive. So I think that's an important modern day resonance. Similarly, I think a huge part of this play is, and you've pointed this out to me, Eric, that you're really highlighting in your production is, the breakdown of communication. How many times these characters say, nope, I don't want to talk about it, or we'll discuss it tomorrow, or I don't want to go there. And the parents do that. That's what they're showing. And then it kind of gets repeated in the younger generation. So those hard conversations, those hard, honest conversations do not happen again until it's too late, until the train has left the station and there's not much to be done. So those are some ideas that I've been thinking about modern day resonances. The only other thing I'll say from the dramaturg standpoint is a modern day resonance for the original production of Beyond the Horizon, which was February 3rd, 1920 was the first matinee tryout. And at that time, New York City was gripped by an epidemic of flu and pneumonia that had claimed more than 2,900 lives since the start of the year. And that was, February. So just days before the show's opening, New York had put in all these kind of restrictions about people where they can gather. They had staggered the theater times so that people weren't jamming up on public transportation, and they were doing. So I think that has a little bit of resonance for 2021, given what we're dealing with now. So yes.
Definitely. I have a couple things to share about what you've just said, but I just wanted to also encourage anyone out there, if they want to add something to our dialogue, please, this would be a good time to do that in our chat.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I completely, I'm very tuned into, as you were saying, communication, which seems timely and universal and very resonant. I feel like in some ways we live in an age now where there's more and more information and no one knows what it means.
Yes.
And so it's just confusing, and as you said, I was really struck by how many times people just said, let's not talk about that right now, or don't tell them, or let's not do this. They just constantly shut each other down, and then I think try to fill in the gaps with their own imagination, which just leads to worse and worse decision making. And that's one of the interesting things about this play, and one of the reasons I think it's very tragic is I don't think everyone is well-intended. We have a series of well-intended characters here. They generally try to do the right thing, and there's very little selfishness in this play. Almost always the tragedy comes out of somebody projecting something on someone else, or making a decision based on not enough information, and especially not just enough information from other people, but not enough self-knowledge about themselves. Like, people just don't seem to ask themselves important questions about what, like one thing I remember thinking right away early in the process was, Andrew, makes this rash, impulsive decision to go off to sea, even though he's very well suited to be a farmer, but he just can't stay on the farm. And part of me, and the actor too, we just kind of, we're thinking, well, why didn't he just go down the road and work on another farm? Like, doesn't he know he's a farmer? It's just like, come on, you're a farmer. Maybe you can't be here, but go farm somewhere else. And they don't seem to make, as you were mentioning or touching on, Beth, they're farmers, and as farmers, you're supposed to be really good planners, because you have to plan a lot to farm, and yet the people in this play make very impulsive decisions, very counter to their farmer natures, which leads to tragedy.
Absolutely right. I love that idea. And I think too, Eric, as you and I have talked about, that this kind of stubbornness, I would say it's manliness that has to be kind of, maybe that's another performance that, oh, I'm not going to a farm, I'm going to go and sail the world because I'm going to really go out on a limb here. And the same thing when, again, without giving too much away, but like when Andrew comes back and tries to offer help, that Robert won't take it. And so some of those, which I think fall under communication breakdown too, is present in this world. And Eric, to your points about, yes, performance and communication breakdown, you and I've talked about this too, about even in 2021 and how individuals present themselves online and on social media. We're thinking about the young people, especially, who are at the center of this play, what they look like on the outside versus what is true, and what their true desires and wishes and hopes are that can't be presented publicly. I think that's part of it. And I would have audiences really listen. Both Robert and Ruth are going to have lines like, I know now, I I understand now. And it's, of course, happened too late, but that's really, certainly important in the world of this play.
Yes, definitely. I've actually noted a few things in the chat. Going back a little bit, the question was about whether this was a live stream Zoom experience or this was recorded, or well, anyway, the answer is it's a couple things. The primary goal for me has been to produce a filmed production of Beyond the Horizon using Dow House as a backdrop. But since things have sort of opened up over the summer, and now, of course, we're being very cautious again, the idea was hatched that we would do 2 live performances. So this is the way I've said it. Some people have asked, like, they thought, okay, you're doing some live and you're doing a recording. So obviously the recording is a recording of what you did live. And I would actually say, strike that, reverse it. We're making a movie, a film, and then I'm going to try to adapt what we did in the film for a couple of live performances. Kind of like Disney taking a Disney movie and putting on an ice rink, if that makes sense to you. But yeah, so it's a little bit that way. But also, I saw somebody made a comment about that there was an Irish play, this play, and then someone else made the comment that there was no drinking in the play, of which I would say, yes, potentially there is no drinking, although the direction we've been going with some characters, I almost feel like they should be drinking on the side. But yes, this is one of the few O'Neill plays you probably could do with no drinking in the play. I also see I've got one from Dave King, and please, Beth, help me, because he's asking some things that you might have a lot more insight into than I do. Maybe you can see it in the chat there. But he's asking about Eugene O'Neill. Was he in some way a disabled husband from the start? I mean, with the idea that Robert in some ways is a disabled husband in Beyond the Horizon, or has he been overly influenced in his thinking and storytelling by misogyny like Strindberg's? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, Dave King, always asking such good questions. Dave King was one of my professors in grad school, so I feel like I'm in a grad seminar. Thank you, Dave, for that great question. I think I'll take like the second part of it, and if we're thinking, and what I have seen is, in my own research and looking at a lot of his plays is, it's pretty uncanny some of the ways that prominent advice, particularly and for wives, which I think was inherently misogynist, this idea of wives keeping up illusions and having to, match their beauty from their wedding day long into their marriages, all of those kinds of things, those get worked into the plays, but they're in the very society and culture that he's writing in. And so I would want to think about that question a little bit more, but I do see that a lot of that, the guidance and the culturally constructed expectations, especially for women, have pretty profound echoes in his plays. And this advice was, really difficult to adhere to. I mean, it was almost impossible to, have a courtship where you're not being honest and authentic, being authentic. And then suddenly, when you get into the marriage, you're supposed to just reveal everything to your husband. There's supposed to be no secrets. And so that's a big jump to do. And I think some of that gets, like I said, echoed in the plays. I'm really hoping Eric's next production is welded. I mean, we've talked about that, right, Eric? So maybe we'll see some of those marital dynamics on stage. Sorry, Eric. And now I want to do Welded on Ice, as a Disney production, like you said. So that would be interesting. But in any case, so so I think that what he's absorbing is really in the culture to begin with, and the notions to be a good wife and to do what's right in a marriage were hugely problematic to begin with, and they are echoed big time in his plays.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I see further down in the chat, from Xander, regarding whether there's room for hostility in Robert towards his brother Andrew by the way he quickly takes decides to declare his love for Ruth and sort of subvert all those expectations and plans. I definitely think that there's possibility for that. I really so far in rehearsal seen it. I would just say that there's definitely, but I will say we do have Robert really having a hard time with the way Andrew doesn't appreciate the opportunities Andrew's had to travel the world. And there is definitely some attitude toward Andrew about how what he's done with his opportunity. And I think that just grows and grows and grows within Robert as he seems more anchored and moored to the farm, and has and has not been free to fly about like Andrew.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I guess I would.
But yeah, no, we're trying to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Keep it good intentions mostly.
Yeah. And I can't wait for our audiences to see what some things that you've discovered in the relationship between Robert and Andrew, kind of the inverse of what Xander's talking about, but about their closeness and what that means for the play. But the idea of hostility too, I'm always struck, and Eric, you said that, Robert kind of taking out on Andrew because he feels, Robert feels so anchored to the farm and things like that. But then it's also interesting how he takes that out on Ruth, that moment when Andrew first gets there and Robert has that really kind of violent telling her to sit down right at the table. You're not going anywhere. And then there's this, constant kind of pushing Ruth back, all right, in the kitchen, or you're with the child, I'm going out to talk to Andrew. And so he really, I think, in some ways moors and anchors Ruth in some profound ways as well throughout the play.
Definitely. I'm just scanning chat here for anything else to come.
Well, I like what, so Eric says he I'm sorry, Dave said to you, Eric, that he recalls that you're a Jamie fan. So, sensitivity to the brothers, bad deal.
Oh yes, that's true. Trying to tell the other story, that's for sure. Actually, one thing I want to share an observation about the in particular the actors, Kyle Goldman, who's playing Andrew, and Will Long, who's playing Robert for us in this film. They both are kind of guys a bit. My experience, I've worked with both of them for a few years now, actually with Will for over a decade. And they're very guy-y, but at the same time, I was really struck, and you touched on this a little bit. They're also they're very comfortable with each other physically in this production. Yeah. I mean, there's a time where one of them grabs the other one's hand to tell him something, and it's just you're really struck. I was really struck by how comfortable they were with each other and are with each other. I think it adds a lot to the production and show how they feel about each other, even when they don't have anything to say you can kind of tell that there's something deep underneath. They're definitely, you would almost say they're twins in that sense of, having some kind of extra connection,
Yeah.
as I've heard some twins, like maybe you, Beth, would
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I also, Eric, I think that that touches on your point too of, sometimes a touch of a hand is a lot easier than actually saying words out loud, right? And with this family where that communication is so hard, sometimes things are communicated in different ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, I should just go a little bit further. Yeah, with the touch, and it reads also, for us, or at least for me as a director, I didn't direct them to make this choice, but there's a scene when one brother is talking to the other brother, and he really wants him to understand, and he reaches his hand across the table, and the other brother takes his hand, and they're holding hands across the table, and you could swear if it was from a distance and it was Valentine's Day that there was some kind of proposal going on. But these are just two brothers, very comfortable with each other, really, really, concerned and caring that the other one understands them or tries to understand where they're coming from. And I think it adds a lot of power to us, to our production here.
I like Steve Bloom. Great quote. But watch out because I'll stab you in the back first chance I get. So there's that brother dynamic.
That's true. That's true. Well, yeah, it depends on what happens after Beyond the Horizon ends. You know, Rob's girl is now free again. Yeah, Um, but anyway, I think we've got touched any. Beth, is there anything else you'd like to just share in summation or conclusion or inspiration moment?
Only that if you are all about all things O'Neill and Steve Bloom, who just was here, Steve and I are co-chairing the O'Neill Society Conference in Boston next summer, and we'd love for all of you to be a part of it. So you can find out more information on the Eugene O'Neill Society website. So I just thought I'd put that hat on here, Eric, just to do some promotion, and the conversations will continue then too.
Absolutely, and I guess I would add that our film is scheduled to premiere on October 2nd, and it will be available on our website. We'll be posting it, and the two live performances take place the weekend of September 25th and 26th here at Dow House, and there's still some tickets available for that. But anyway, Beth, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and everyone else, thank you for joining us, and we hope we'll see you in one way or another in the near future.